Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, who also happens to be my direct boss. So, Professor Neville Webber is the head of the School of Mathematics and Statistics here at the University of Sydney. He graduated with a PhD from here in 1981 and spent most of his career at the University of Sydney. And he's been head of school for the last, this is the 5th year, I believe.
This seems like centuries.
It seems like, yeah. I can say as a member of staff that I think he is, in fact, universally admired by all the staff, and that's very rare for a head of school at the University of Sydney. In 2001, the Statistical Society of Australia awarded Neville Webber honorary life membership for his service to the professional organisation at both national and New South Wales branch level, where he's been active in committees and things ever since he was a postgraduate student. He's also had a long connection with secondary mathematics syllabus committees, the high school certificate examinations, and the New South Wales Hsc standard setting operations. He's been on the ATAR advisory board for the new national curriculum in mathematics, chair of the New South Wales Hsc Mathematics Examination Committee in 1998-1999, senior judge for mathematics for the first HSC stand. Oh, I'm going to go on forever and ever and ever and ever. Yes, so I think I'll just get him to come up and give his presentation.
Someone's after a cushy allocation for next year, I suspect. Thanks, everyone. That was very flattering. And thanks for the opportunity to come along. Judy asked me to come along and said you've got 10 minutes to talk about the ATAR scaling and some of the issues associated with mathematics at the moment. Thank you. No pressure. Well, some of these issues have been touched on previously, but just to reinforce the statement that the ATAR is a rank. It's not a mark, it's not a score in terms of your average exam mark or performance. It's a rank. It's your position, or presenting your position relative to a particular cohort. And it's calculated using data that's provided by the New South Wales Board of Studies, now BOSTES. And so it's looking at the HSC group in terms of generating the various parameters that are reported about the ATAR calculation. So the IB and other programs, they get ATARs calculated using a different procedure, and that's not what we're on about. So it's an index that's used to assess university places, and if you're applying for university positions, you'll find that there are still some degree programs that have specific prerequisites, like actuarial studies, but unfortunately very few these days. The current government funding formulas for universities has meant that universities have pulled back from having hard prerequisites to having assumed knowledge statements, which gives them flexibility in taking students into their programs, and this is an increasing problem in STEM areas where students are not necessarily coming in with the appropriate assumed knowledge in mathematics. All candidates who've met the formal prerequisites are then ranked, and the ATAR is just one of the criteria that's used. It's probably the most widely used one, but for many degrees there will be other criteria like the special tertiary admissions test, interviews, auditions, portfolios if you're going to the College of the Arts, and so on. So there are a number of criteria used to allocate university places. And many universities now have flexible entry or bonus point schemes, and it's become apparent that a lot of people are not aware of these schemes, and it's an area that maths teachers in particular need to look at very closely when they're advising students, because in most universities, if you look on their web pages in the STEM areas, it's science, technology, engineering, you'll find that they're offering bonus points for candidates who've got 2-unit maths who score a band 4, 5 or 6. The number of points will differ depending on the degree, and there'll be bonus points if they tackle the extension courses. So students should be aware that if they put the extra effort in, take the more challenging course, part of the game, if they're playing the game about trying to maximise their ATAR, is to look at what would their performance be in terms of the bonus points that they'd be offered if they were able to sort of do the 2-unit and score a band 4 or better, if that's one of the degree programs they're going for. But the number of bonus points vary by degree and they vary by university, so you need to look across the spectrum, but almost every university has a web page which will detail that information, but you've got to look at it degree by degree typically. There's no sort of nice summary to grab. A colleague of mine Jackie Ramage at University of Wollongong talks about students sort of mortgaging their future by choosing to do general rather than 2-unit mathematics because it's a short-term gain. They're trying to maximise their ATAR for entry purposes, but then they will struggle when they get to university if they choose one of the science-based health sciences, technology, engineering programs where they find that they really do have to get on top of calculus and its applications. And those students will then have problems completing their university degrees in minimum time. So the answer to John's question, well, last year there were 70,686 people who completed at least one board-developed course. So this is a course that we could use in the ATAR calculation in that it has a formal exam. 54,642 candidates met the criteria to receive an ATAR. You can see I'm in the stats section of the school. And there were 27,202 different course combinations, of which 19,576 were taken by one student only. So the HSC is extremely flexible, as John said, probably a bit too flexible at times. When you're looking at the selective schools entrance tests, all the candidates do the same papers. And so you just add up the marks and it's very easy to rank the candidates. They're all doing the same mix of topics. Modulo some fine-tuning for special consideration. But with the HSC, it's an extremely flexible program, so you've got students coming with very, very different course combinations, and they're all applying for these various university programs. You need to have a way of ranking them. And the ATAR is what's being developed as a way of helping universities in that process, deal with this high volume number of applications for a very large number of degree programs, and the decisions all have to be processed in those few weeks over Christmas, after Christmas, New Year, so that students can enrol in mid-January. When you look at the HSC marks, we can't use those marks directly because the aligned marks and the raw marks are not comparable across subjects. When the board moved to the new standards-based HSC, there was no effort made whatsoever to say that a band 6 in one subject meant the same as a band 6 in another. So the aligned marks can't be compared. Unfortunately, the papers produce rank tables based on the number of band 6s, and this is sort of distorting student behaviour because a band 6 in basket weaving is not the same as a band 6 in Latin extension. And I'll steer clear of the maths comments. And the raw marks aren't comparable because the exams are very different. The raw marks aren't comparable one year to the next even because you have a hard paper, an easy paper, whatever, that will distort the patterns of marks. So scaling tries to determine the strength of the competition in each course. It's really focusing on students' ranks in each subject and how they perform relative to the other students in that subject, and then how those students have performed across the range of subjects that they've taken. The scaling parameters are calculated each year, so if there's a shift in candidature from one year to the next, it happens very rarely in the big subjects like mathematics, but having said that, English Standard last year, there was a big shift. English Studies came on board, 5,000 students basically pulled out of English Standard, and so the standard of English Standard went up. And the scale mark, it was the first time, in fact the only time, I think the median mark in English Standard has been in band 4, the HSC, and the scale mark shifted noticeably for standard English because there was that huge shift in one year. Most of the other changes have been quite gradual in most subjects. With a bit of nudging UAC, we've got the report on the 2013 HSC is now up on the UAC website, and that's the URL given at the bottom of the page there, and that has all the details about the scaling process last year. As soon as the HSC results are released, and the next day when the ATARs are available, the scaling information, core information goes up on the UAC website that day. So the day after the HSC release date, you'll have all the scaling parameters and so on for the various subjects. The tables that are at the back of the report go up onto the UAC website at that point. So you have access to all the hard data at that time. What's gone up now is just the explanation, some of the features that have been highlighted in the preliminary part of the report. ATAR eligibility, most of you will be aware, having gone through the system, what the conditions are for the award of an ATAR, but as mathematics teachers, the one that you need to be aware of when you're advising students is the first one, at least 4 subjects. If you're in a school where you have Extension 2 mathematics, you occasionally come across students who want to do Extension 2 mathematics, 3 units of English and 3 units of music, or 4 units of English, 4 units of maths and 2 units of chemistry. Those situations, they've only got 3 subjects, and so they'll run foul of that first point. So you need to be careful in advising students about their subject choices to make sure that they meet all the criteria to be eligible for an ATAR. Now the actual scaling. The scaling uses the raw Hsc marks. These are not the aligned marks that are reported to students, but the actual scores that they achieve on the exams themselves. And then the moderated school assessments. The school assessments are moderated using the raw Hsc marks to get a value for the 50% school assessment. Those 2 raw marks are then averaged to get a course mark. And throughout we'll talk about marks out of 50 per unit, because although most subjects are 2-unit subjects, there are some 1-unit extensions and 1-unit subjects like Studies in Religion 1 and so on. So the first step in the scaling process is to adjust all courses to a common top mark, and then to essentially create Z scores. So move everything to a mean of 25 and a standard deviation of 12. That first step effectively takes out the differences in the exam papers essentially from one year to the next. Because now whether it was a hard exam or a very easy exam, the first step in the process is to move everything to a mean of 25. So, and a common standard deviation. So if you look at the data for mathematics, we've got the raw means there on the Hsc. Oops, sorry. Didn't realise I had that much power. Obviously, don't. How do I get this?
View.
Sorry?
View.
Sorry.
Top, middle, bit view. Oh.
Sorry again. Yeah. Thank you. Last year was a tougher year. 2012 was an easier exam. So the average raw mark was 31.6 out of 50 versus 27. But when you look at the aligned marks, when those exam papers, the group of judges come in and decide what would be the performance that would be indicative of a student who was just band 6 or just band 5, and then those marks are aligned, we get the Hsc means are roughly the same, and the scale means are roughly the same from year to year. The next step is to calculate the scale mean and standard deviation for each course, and the scale mean for a course is the average of the scale marks of the students in all their subjects who take that course. So you get a massive system of simultaneous equations that have to be solved if you're that way inclined. Fortunately, you don't have to do it by hand. And then that gives you the scaling parameters for the 2-unit courses. Then the extension courses are scaled off on the basis of the performance of the extension students on the common 2-unit paper, with variations for history and mathematics extension 2 where the structures are slightly different. The next step is to calculate the maximum scale marks. And this step in the process was introduced in the late 1990s, before the Hsc changed, because people were gaining. Who'd have thought? And in the old Hsc, the top mark was always set at 50, and 50 always scaled to 50. And so there was a drift out of the more challenging subjects into the easier subjects, if you're an able student, to try and get close to 50, or get 50 in that subject, to help with your aggregate. So the process was put in place to essentially cap, as it was called at the time. The maximum mark is set as a certain number of standard deviations beyond the scale mean. So if the course has a low scale mean, indicating a sort of lower than average ability candidature, then the maximum mark will be pulled back from 50. In the maths community, general mathematics is the course where that shows up. For all the other maths courses, the maximum is 50. So the maximum mark for general maths last year was 45.7. So a student cannot score more than that in terms of their contribution to the scale mark by taking general, because the mean in that course is quite low, it's 21.5. Remember, the 25 is the sort of overall average mean for the courses. Once we've got the scaling parameters, you essentially unpick the Z scores and do a little bit of a bit of adjustment to make sure you don't overshoot, so no one gets more than 50 out of 50. You get the scale marks for each candidate. You then pick the 10 best units, 2 units of English and the 8 best other units to form an aggregate, and the aggregates then form the candidates' ranks. The ranks are then reported against the corresponding Year 7 cohort. So the ATAR just takes the ranks given by the aggregates and reports them as if they were ranks relative to the Year 7 cohort. And in New South Wales, about 63% of the Year 7 cohort went on to achieve an ATAR in Year 12 last year.
We're out of time, so
Okay.
So a couple of key points to sum up.
Okay, so the big issues, HSC participation and gender issues. In the first table you can see there's been a massive increase in the number of students who are doing no mathematics, and that's more marked for females than it is for males. Shifting candidatures, if you look at I'm giving the percentage of ATAR eligible candidates to do extension 2, extension 1 and so on, because I use percentages because the number of candidates has changed quite dramatically with the change in school leaving age to 17. The number of students going through, the demographics are changing. But if you look at proportions, extension 2 has stayed fairly stable. Extension 1's had a small decline since 2001 when the new HSC came in. General stayed fairly stable, and it's the 2-unit only which has had a substantial drop. So students are dropping from 2-unit into general and then from general into no maths. In this year's report, because of the interest in the performance of 2-unit only versus general students, we've managed to pull out the data on the scale means and standard deviations and percentiles for the 2-unit only candidature, not the combined 2-unit and extension candidature. So those things are broken down, they're all in the report, you can pick those up off the web. And if you look at the scale means over time, you find that the extension courses have been remarkably stable since the new HSC came in. General mathematics and the mathematics 2-unit only have both increased. So the shifting candidatures improve the quality of the candidature in both groups as judged by the scale mean, but that's not necessarily a good thing for mathematics.